Good afternoon. My name is Allison Bainbridge, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today. Thank you for joining us virtually to celebrate Sofía Ramirez's book, Every Step of the Way. She's holding it up, beautiful cover there. Um, Please feel free to put questions into the chat for those of you who want to ask questions. This poignant yet hopeful conversation that we're going to have is going to be centered on Sophia's lyrical, heart-aching debut about the loves we lose, the roots we return to, and the fragile beauty of starting over. A story of love, loss, and healing. Every step of the way is about the people who shape us, the weight of letting go, and the courage it takes to begin again. Sophia was born and raised in San Jose, Costa Rica. We were just talking about it. Such a beautiful place, and has been chasing big dreams ever since. At 16, she moved to the US with her mom and successfully pursued a career in professional wrestling, not the standard background for an author. Along the way, she fell in love with storytelling, languages, and a life built around movement. She's now based in Orlando, Florida. She's a sign language interpreter with a master's degree, and she's also an aerial arts enthusiast. And she was encouraging me to try it. I'm not so sure, but it sounds like it's such a fun thing to do. She's an avid backpacker who's explored over 30 countries. She's also a firm believer in books. Intermittently between a then and now alternating format with a journalistic writing style and touching premise. This novel is well worth reading, very highly recommended. So there are so many questions that I could ask you about your bio. That would take a whole hour alone. But we're here to talk about your novel. So I want to start by asking how you came up with this story, what inspired you, and are there aspects of your life and background that compelled you to write this book?
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here with you. Um, every step of the way came from a place in my heart that I really needed to heal. There was a lot of grief that I was experiencing. I had lost some people and I didn't know how to deal with it. I couldn't deal with it. And I'm not a fan of going to therapy and talking about my feelings. So I did the best next thing, which is try to put them down on paper and make sense of them. And that's how the story was originally born. This book is dedicated to both of my grandmothers, one of whom I recently lost. She passed away last year, but my other grandmother actually suffers from cognitive decline. And so for years, we've been almost living the same day with her, a different version of the same day. And that just breaks your heart. And that's really where the original grief started. I couldn't process that because she was always such a vibrant woman and she's my role model, that I couldn't fathom not having the grandmother that I always knew. And that's really why I started to try to process all those feelings with the book through Noah. And that's where it was born. I think my personal experience comes from that grief of seeing somebody that you know become somebody that they can't recognize. And then later on in life, I lost a couple of people that then that grief also confused me. And I was able to put it in the book to try to make sense of it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting you chose to write this story in first person. Can you tell us a little why you chose to use this voice?
I am so glad that you brought that up. And I am embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I wrote this book in first person because it felt intimate. It isn't my story, but there's a lot of experiences that I put in it that belong to me, and I needed to really feel connected to Noah and the characters. But one of the constructive feedback that I received from people that read the book was, I love that you did it in first person, but the fact that you also had second person point of view, I didn't feel as connected with it. I didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, what do you mean what is that? I've only ever heard of first and third person. How did I do something that I don't even know that I did? Immediately went on Google and I was like, I don't know what this means. What does this mean? Give me an example. And then when I understood, I was like, oh no, I did do that. But I did it intentionally because it felt so much more intimate and personal with the characters that I chose it because I felt like it was the only way to really express what I needed to express with the intensity and the intention that I wanted to portray in it.
Got it. I'm wondering maybe this would be a good point for you to just read for a few minutes, a little bit, so we can hear it in your voice.
Yes, I am nervous. I
Don't be
can't
nervous.
promise I won't mess up.
It's okay. It's okay. We're excited for you.
Thank you. I am happy to read. Would you like chapter 1 or would you
Sure.
like chapter 7?
Whatever you think will give us a good sense of jumping off.
Let's do chapter 7.
Okay.
It involves the three main characters, which are Noah, Derek, and the grandma, and I think it's a great way to kind of get a sense of how the characters relate to one another. I'm also not great with voices, so have some grace, please.
Just your voice. We want it in your voice.
There you go. It says, we were in the train station with 3 grocery bags each. Our hands were red from the plastic bags cutting into our palms, but I felt happy and hopeful for the day ahead. The station lobby was decorated patriotically. Red, white, and blue garlands haphazardly decorated the desk, and there was one small American flag taped to the ticket counter. 4th of July was celebrated in all its American glory. I bought this jar of lollipops for your grandma. Do you think she'll like it? You asked nervously. I mean, it's a jar with 150 lollipops for a single old lady. Frankly, I hope she doesn't like them. If you give her diabetes, I'm going to be so pissed. I have joked. Still, the fact that you worried whether she'd like it made my chest tighten in the best way. You wanted her approval almost as much as I did. The train ride wasn't too long. I had called my grandma a couple of days after a coffee shop date to break the news, and her excitement was palpable through the phone. She let out a high-pitched squeak that was so sharp it was only audible to dogs. We agreed on spaghetti and homemade meatballs with cheesy garlic bread, and I think we may have gone a little bit overboard with the groceries. We also had a birthday cake, magic candles, party hats, and balloons. I didn't think so many decorations were necessary, but you wanted to make a big impression, and why not? I hadn't seen my grandma in a few months, and turning 70 was a huge deal. I called Dad to see if he would like to come, but he said he was feeling a little under the weather. He sent his regards and said that since you were going, you could take his place. It was the 20th anniversary of my mom's passing that year, so I understood he wanted to spend more time in the cemetery, and I gave him his space. I was a little sad that he felt the need to cover it up with a small white lie. It stung, if I'm honest. Even after all these years, he still couldn't just say he missed her. Maybe that was his way of keeping himself intact. Maybe it was mine too. He still felt the need to act strong, and I respected his wishes. To our surprise, and I don't mean I'm sorry, to our surprise, more yours than mine, as we were getting off the train, we heard a whistle. And I don't mean a referee, crossing guard, lifeguard kind of whistle. I mean the kind of whistle you hear on the street when getting catcalled. The kind of whistle that sets your teeth on edge. We were going to ignore it, thinking it was a degenerate drunk. And then we heard it, loud, very loud, and clear. God dang it. Are you two my birthday present? Because you're fine as hell. Can I wrap you two up in a nice bow? Oh boy, there she was, the famous degenerate. I didn't even need to turn around. I could recognize that voice anywhere. You looked at me, horrified. By the way, I forgot to tell you, my grandma has quite the sense of humor. You widen your eyes in response, in an inaudible gasp forming on your lips. I sigh in a mix of relief and resignation and turn to face Grandma Nadia, who was holding up a literal sign like she was a cab driver picking us up from the airport. Welcome home, Noah and Derek, it read. God, I love that woman. You read the sign and took in the person holding it. This is freaking awesome, you whispered excitedly. I chuckled. Happy birthday, Grandma, I shouted back as we ran to meet her. She hugged us both so tight that it hurt a little in the best possible way. When she let go of the hug, I stayed there just a little longer, pressing my forehead against hers, memories of when I was a kid flashing back in my mind, feeling deeply grateful that we were here now. Her perfume still smelled like cinnamon. Suddenly, I was 8 again, legs dangling off the counter as she let me lick the spoon covered in chocolate cake batter. Man, 70 years old already? 3 more decades and you'll be a whole century. Hey, respect your elders, you punk, she joked, pointing at me. Also, introduce me to this hot stud, she said, shifting her finger toward you. Hello, miss, was all you were able to say before she cut you off. Nope, I will be having none of that. She shook her head furiously. You are now officially my grandson, and you will be referring to me as grandma. End of story. With that, she cupped your face in both her hands and planted a kiss on your forehead, so aggressive it left a lipstick mark. There it was, the stamp of approval. I don't think you realize just how big of a deal that was, but to me, it felt like the universe had shifted a little in our favor. You are officially a part of the family. Well, thank you very much, Miss Grandma. She raised her eyebrows in warning and gave a satisfied nod when you corrected yourself. And happy birthday. I'm not sure if you like candy, but I bought you this in case you did. You smiled as you handed her the family-sized jar of candy. Her eyes lit up. Sweet. I used to love these as a kid. You're the best, sweetie. Thank you very much, she said, cradling the jar in the crook of her left elbow and pinching your cheek with her other hand. You winced in pain, but tried not to show it. I winced right along with you. Her fingers hadn't lost strength over the years. Sometimes my grandma reminded me of a fraternity bro, and others she reminded me of how a cartoon grandmother would behave. She sidestepped to reveal the small supermarket cart she had been hiding behind her. Now, I figured you'd show up here with groceries unprepared, so I brought a little cart that way you'd have hands left to cook with when you get home. I know I used to do all the cooking, but as you can tell, I am decrepitly old now. I will be needing a couple of handsome sous chefs to assist me in the kitchen. Sounds like a plan, I said as we packed our bags and headed to her house. I placed my arm around her as we walked. I love you so, so much, and I'm so glad we could celebrate together like old times, I said, resting my head on her shoulder. Catcalling and sexual harassment aside, you two really are the best present I could have asked for, she said, unwrapping a lime-flavored lollipop.
Oh, that's so sweet. You get such a sense. I have such a good visual of her just in the way you talked about that.
Thank you.
So Noah, your main character, finds herself fighting to hold on to someone who is already slipping away. And many people can relate to that need to hold on to someone they love, no matter what the relationship, despite the feeling that it may not be possible or appropriate to save them or rescue them. I'm curious what your thoughts are about this sort of difficult and complex dynamic that you talk about in your book.
I think for me, there were two really important things that I had to keep in mind. And one is that sometimes we talk about grief with somebody that you've lost. They're no longer with us, and we can process that death and how that void makes us feel. But there's a way in which you can grieve somebody that's still with us when you see them turning into somebody that they're not anymore. And that was crucial for me because I didn't hear a lot of conversation around it. So I wanted to really introduce that conversation in a way that was delicate and that it was sensitive, but I really had to talk about it because I felt it. And the thing about grief, which is the second thing that I always kept in mind, to me, grief is such a personal experience. It's so excruciatingly lonely because it doesn't matter if one person loses their mom and a different person loses their mom. Yes, they have that same loss in common, but the grief is always different. And nobody can know how you feel about the person that you lost. And that's depressing because you're so alone. Even if people say, I'm so sorry for your loss, I know how you're feeling, you don't. Even if you lost a person too, because there's no way that you could know how I feel. And that loneliness was terrifying. And that's what I was trying to really make sense of writing the book and seeing how I can empathize and sympathize with Noah. Because when I started writing the book, it was 5 years ago. I was a child, I was 22. And the grief that I was experiencing came from the grief of seeing my grandmother become somebody that she wasn't. And that's where I came from. But then I placed Noah in these really tough situations. And I realized at one point that I had to step away from the story because I couldn't relate to her and I hadn't experienced the same amount of grief that she had for me to have the authority and credibility to get her out of those situations.
Mhm.
But I knew that life has a way of teaching you lessons. And a few years later, I lost two people within 4 months of each other so suddenly and so unexpectedly that it really rocked my world. And I didn't know what was happening with me. That then I really realized that I could relate to Noah and have some sort of awareness as to how she felt and empathy for how she felt. And I could say, no, I really know where you're coming from. And let's see how we get you out of this. And hopefully I can get out of it too, because I felt so suffocated by grief. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I was feeling really angry because I felt so suspended in it and like this numb cloud of I don't know what's going on around me. And whenever I saw somebody laugh, I would get so mad. Because how dare they have a good time when I'm stuck, when I can't move, when I'm so paralyzed by this grief. And so getting out of that mindset was super hard. But in turn, I understood that the only way through these things is time and humor in a way. You know, you have to introduce that laughter back into your life to try to make sense of it, because if not, it becomes a really dark place and it becomes really hard to get out of it.
Mhm. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry for your loss. It feels though like you were able to get some relief from writing this book as well as time healing it. As you said, grief has many faces, and um, I'm curious. There's a reference in the description of the book of choosing hope and um, finding the courage uh, to rise above this. And I'm wondering if there were certain tools that you use that you could share that were helpful towards this purpose, and or that were they the same tools that you gave to Noah?
That is such a good question. I love good questions so much. Um, as far as tools that I used, I'm gonna sidetrack real quick. I
Mhm,
do recommend therapy. I didn't do that, but I think that's the healthiest way to go about it.
mhm,
But as far as what I did, I really use music as a way to cope and as therapy. I had a time where I was using short-term coping mechanisms that weren't effective at all, and that's where I turned to writing. But working out and music were a huge part of me trying to figure out how my body felt and how I had to respond to it. But also, I would say I had a friend once, and this saying never left my mind ever. And I would constantly saying over and over. It became almost like a mantra, which was everything in life, whether it's good or it's bad, will pass. And it's so important to remind yourself of that, because when you're in that space where you feel like your world is ending and there's no moving forward, that reminder was almost like a breath of fresh air for me to go, okay, I feel awful. This sucks. But little by little, it will, because it has to pass. It will pass because life will get better and then it will get worse, but then it gets better again. And so that constant reminder was what really helped me through my own grief. And I think that's what got Noah out too. Noah had a really good support system, which I do too. The difference is that Noah really relied on that support system. I
mhm,
didn't want to. So I became very selfish with my grief. I don't like talking about feelings, much less with my family. I'm weird like that. And
mhm,
so music therapy and that constant reminder was how I got through it. And it's a process. It's not Grief is never done with. You don't have a period at the end of it. You don't get to finish feeling that sense
mhm,
of grief, but you can definitely manage it with time and
mhm.
find hope um through those times.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Noah relied on her support system and you feel like you didn't, that you didn't want to. So it's interesting that you would give this character um, that ability, and I'm wondering if maybe it's because um, you were sort of working out with her what you wish maybe that you could do, and that's maybe how it helped get you out of the grief.
I think so. I have a very weird mentality and it's not recommended. You shouldn't feel this way, but I don't describe it as imposter syndrome, but I feel like the recent people that I've lost, the degree of relationship that I had to those people, there were always people that were closer to them. So it's not that I wasn't allowing myself to grieve it, it's just that I felt this is not the case, but I felt like my grief was a little bit below the intensity of my other family members' feelings. And so they were that priority. I should cater to them, make sure they're okay. I'll figure out my stuff later, but I really need to make sure that these people are fine. And they weren't making me feel that way. I just decided to feel that way on my own accord. They were great.
Mhm.
They were like, we should all feel what we're feeling. But I was like, no, no, no. We need to focus on you. And that's not great. And it really weighs down on you. And I think my family knows that about me. They know that I like to put up this fine front, even when I'm not. But in those times of so much grief and stress, I think everybody finds their own way to cope, and they were very understanding about it.
Yeah.
But I had a cousin that was like, "Thank you so much for like taking care of grandma," and I was like,
Mm.
duh. Like, what else was I supposed to do? And he was like, no, feel your, no, 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 I don't want to feel anything. And so through Noah, I was able to really understand the importance of relying on people that you love and people
Yeah.
that are willing to be there for you and they want to be there for you. You just, I'm so stubborn and I didn't want to, but I'm learning, I'm trying to grow. And I think writing this book helped me grow a little bit. I now like to, I don't like it, but I try to face my feelings in a way that before I would just ignore them. And so I see growth and change, and that is good.
Good. That's great. So I think it's interesting because when Noah's life comes undone, she turns to the person who's always been her anchor, which is her grandmother. And you had mentioned earlier the relationship with your grandmother. We talked about this before a little bit. And I'm wondering if that relationship compelled you to develop the one between Noah and her grandmother, or um, are there other people in your life that you say you don't necessarily turn to, that you prefer to sort of do it all on your own, take that into yourself? But are there people in your life or a person who you did turn to or would turn to in that kind of situation at this point?
um, so my parents know me best. I
Uh-huh.
don't even have to talk for them to know how I feel. And that makes it really easy for me because I don't have to say it. They just know. And
Hmm.
they'll roll their eyes and go, we know, we get it. Like we
Hmm.
know exactly who you are. And that's very comfortable for me because it's very easy to not have to talk about it for somebody to get it.
Hmm.
But a huge catalyst in the relationship between Noah and her grandma was my grandma, the one that has that cognitive decline, because there was a point where Grandma Nadia was very similar to my own grandma. They both curse a lot. They're very active. They're very, I can do it myself. And I love that so much about my grandma. But seeing her depend now on us so much and have to rely on us to be able to do daily tasks is what was breaking my heart the most. So, Grandma Nadia is a version of my grandma years ago, the grandma that I really remember as being this firecracker the whole time. I can do it. I can do a million things at once. I got everything under control. It's really my way of almost paying homage and a tribute to my grandma and that version of her that I wish was still with us, and really channeling it on this book almost as a way to remember her, because that would be the conversations we would have. Exactly how Grandma Nadia and Noah treat each other and communicate with each other and joke around with each other is the way that we do. And
Great.
that was a way of me to pay tribute to that relationship.
Lovely. So, without giving any spoilers, there are three twists in this book that kind of come in rapid succession, and we don't want to give anything away. But can you maybe just talk about how you came up with those? What led you to develop these? Was it to move the plot? Was it just something that came up that you wanted to try? Could you talk about that a little?
That's very interesting because, like I had mentioned before, this book was used for me as a tool to cope. And
Hmm.
so my core feelings were there. And then little by little, it became a story. I had never written a book before. I didn't go to school for writing. I don't know the first thing about publishing a book, much less. And so I thought in my innocence 5 years ago that my job as a writer was to write the book and that would be it. No, there's a million other things that I had to learn how to do. And so when I started writing it, I was like, well, what would happen? I have Noah and Derek. How can we make them represent the core elements of a romantic novel, which is sort of where I was going to, and make sure that we address that element of true love and fairy tale fantasy that we see, but really bring in real life into it and what that relationship would look like when it's uncomfortable, when we cross boundaries, when communication doesn't work. How can I make them a real couple? I can't talk about the twists because that'd be
Yeah.
terrible of me. But the core of that relationship was, yes, I want to honor the romance genre, but also make it a real relationship.
Mhm.
I don't know how to word the other twists without giving them away.
Well, don't give them away. But
Right.
did they come up as you were writing the book?
They did. They
Oh,
did. It was really cool. And it took me a really long time to write this book. And for a long period of that time, I didn't write at all. But my boyfriend got me a book dedicated for like book ideas. So
uh-huh.
I would jot things down and draw things. But you can't like go to the grocery store and in the middle of the produce aisle, pop out your book and start writing. So a lot of it really was little memos on my phone. But they just came to me. And one day I was just about to go to sleep and I was like, what if this happened? Wouldn't that be a plot twist? Wouldn't that be shocking? And
Mm-hmm.
so I added it to see what would happen. And once I saw that it fit, I was like, okay, that's cool. Let's figure out what's going to happen before that, leading to it, and how we're going to respond to it afterwards. So that's how
Okay.
that came about. But I don't want to give anything away
No,
because,
we don't want to give, we want people
right,
to read it for
right.
themselves. But so that leads me to asking some sort of writing process questions. Readers as well as budding writers always enjoy hearing about a writer's process. So I'm curious about if you plotted this out in advance. Did you have an outline? Did you have a bulletin board with little post-its all over it? Or did you sit down and, as some writers, they call it pantser because it's by the seat of your pants where you're just writing and the characters are sort of leading you through it. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, do you have a schedule for writing? You said you stopped for a while. Um, how did the timing work and how long did it take you?
As far as timing, it took me 5 years from when I decided the day I turned 22, December 28th of 2021, I decided that I was going to write a book. And that's how I work. One day I decide something and then I do it because I'm very stubborn and I like to finish what I start. So I said, I'm going to write a book, but I didn't tell anybody about it because it was 9 o'clock at night. And I was like, I'm going to write a book. So I opened my laptop. I swear to you, this is how it went down. I opened my laptop and I wrote a page and I said, okay, that's a great ending for this story. I wrote the last page before I even wrote anything before. That
Okay.
last page ended up becoming like the fourth to last page, but that's how it started. And
Okay.
then at the time, I was a full time student. I was working part time. I was a part time wrestling. COVID was just starting. So I didn't know what was going to happen, but I didn't have a set schedule because I was so busy that any little pocket of time that I had, I would use to write. That happened for about 2 years. Then I took a huge break and I came back and now I had a full time job. I was getting my master's. Life was happening again. I was still wrestling. I was doing all these things. I was extremely busy to a point where it's not healthy for a person to be that busy. And I had really good time management in the sense that I was getting everything done, but I was not sleeping. So any little pocket that I could find to write, I would take advantage of it. But as far as my process, it was a mess. It was chaotic because I didn't know what I was doing. I really thought I just had to write, and then somebody would go, let me fix this for you. And then somebody would go, I will publish this. And then somebody would go, these are your events. And that would be it. I really thought it was going to be that simple, but I was so naive. When I found out that that wasn't the case, I got stressed. I Googled how to publish a book. And the bullet points in this list was a million. I got so overwhelmed that I was like, you know what? Let's just focus step by step. And little by little, I did my research. I started crossing things off my checklist and I was able to publish it. But as an indie author, when you self publish and you don't know how to, and you have no resources or no people you trust to ask questions, it's intimidating. But at the same time, I'm not a writer. Well, now I am, but I wasn't a
Mhm.
writer. So there was no pressure, absolutely no pressure for me to do a great job. So it felt very relaxing in that sense, very freeing for me to just say, let me try this. It didn't work. Okay, let me try that and see what stuck. So in short, it was a mess. It was chaos. I don't recommend it. I wish I was more organized, but I didn't know there were all these tools that keep your chapters in place, and it's so easy to click. It was a mess. I just didn't know, but now I know, a next time, if there is a next time, I know it would be better and easier and more smooth.
So it sounds like you just decided to write a book that you weren't necessarily always thinking about this. You were a wrestler, you got your master's in something else, you are a sign language interpreter. What is it that is there something in your past that when you were young that you said, I want to be a writer, or did you really enjoy reading books? Is there any book that maybe, had a big impact on you?
Right. I never thought I would be a writer. When I was a kid, I didn't like reading. I forced myself to read the Goosebumps series because I like spooky. And then I moved on to Junie B. Jones, which now I love. But back then it was a chore for me to sit down and read. It wasn't until I was about 17 where I had to read a book for school. And we had to read three-quarters of it. And I was like, what do you mean we're not going to finish it? How ridiculous is that? So I finished it forcefully against my will, but I forced myself to do it. And I liked it. And I was like, well, I like this. Let me try this murder book, see how I feel. And little by little, I really fell in love with writing, but with reading, but writing was still not a thing I wanted to do until I started feeling confused by all this grief. But it wasn't like a childhood dream of mine. And part of it makes me a little nervous because I feel like aspire writers are going to be like, well, you don't didn't even want to do this. Why did you do it? Because eventually I did need to do it to find a way out of everything that I was feeling, but it wasn't a childhood dream that I fulfilled. It was a very recent adult dream that I was able to find. And as far as inspiration, I don't know if you've read We Are Okay by Nina LaCour.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. First book that wasn't murder related that made me feel that made me feel the way that I hoped every step of the way would make people feel. It also has a grandfather in the story, and I realized that elderly people are not really featured the way that I feel like they should be in novels or movies or shows, and they have so
Mm-hmm.
much value, and they're so wise that they should be there. And I really felt like I needed to write a story that try to emulate that feeling and that um, sentiment that We Are Okay caused in me. And I really wanted to replicate that feeling for different audience members that hopefully find some truth in the words that I wrote.
I love what you said about older people now that
Love
I'm
it.
resembling an older person in my life. I think I agree with you. We are not presented as often as we are. I think people sometimes have this sort of caricature of older people, and I think, just everybody has something to offer no matter what age, and getting older, we have a certain wisdom to offer as well. So,
A
um,
certain wisdom that young people we don't have. And you know what it is? I can't understand people my age. I don't we're not we don't vibe in the same frequency. I've always, ever since I was a kid, gotten along way better with people that are much older than me because it just made sense. I feel like I'm old here and I'm
oh.
old here.
Uh-huh. You're an
My
old
body will
soul.
eventually catch up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So how did the title come about? Was it something you had in mind? Did it, pop into your head in the beginning, the middle, the end? What inspired it?
Mhm. This title, it went through many changes.
Hmm.
Originally, it was going to be called The Word, but it felt so biblical. It didn't make sense.
Hmm.
It didn't feel like it fit. I was like, that's gotta go. And then I wrote a teeny tiny poetry book years ago that it's hidden away somewhere. And the book is maybe this big. It's this thick. It's tiny. And the title is this big. The title is They Said I Could Be Anything I Wanted.
Hmm.
It barely fit in the page of the cover. But before I published that book, I thought every step of the way was going to be They said I could be everything I wanted. And I really molded over every time that I was about to go to sleep, in the shower, while driving. I was like, does this make sense? Does this fit? But I didn't feel it. And if I don't feel it, it's not happening.
Mhm.
And then I was thinking about my grandma one day and I was like, wow, like she really has been with me every step of the way. And then
Aw,
I stopped what I was doing and I went, let me write it down immediately. And that's how the title came about, because it's
aw.
every step of the way that Grandma Nadia has been with Noah. And
Mhm.
really also it mirrors the journey of me learning how to write a book and how I really had to do my research and go every step by
Mhm.
step. So it just felt very meaningful to the story and it felt right. And once it feels right, you have to do it. You have to go with it.
I love that. That's great. So I mentioned in the beginning when you held your book out, hold it up again for us if you would. It's such a beautiful cover. Um, Someone actually asked in our chat if you did the artwork for it, and if not, where did you come up with
God,
it?
no. I no. I would not be able to get anything near this. My cover designer, which funny enough, I didn't know I needed one when I started writing. That was a shock. That was a huge shock. Her name is Eva. I don't want to butcher her last name. She's from the Netherlands. It's Eva Polakovikova. I think that's how you pronounce it. We only spoke via email, but she's so good. She's in the Netherlands. I found her via Reedsy, which is a great resource if you're an indie author, if you're self-publishing. Reedsy is a fantastic place where you can get a lot of freelance graphic designers, interior designers, editors, anything that you need. That's a great place to find it. And I sort of told her the elements that I wanted in the cover. I really felt like the sunset was a crucial part of this story because it really talks and dives deep into colors. So the sunset was a must. The guitar was a must because it talks about music, and letters were a must. After that, I was like, I trust you. And then she did the most amazing thing. And she sent me the preliminary artwork, which I thought was the finished cover back then because I knew nothing about anything.
Hmm.
Then when she gave me the last version, I fell in love with it immediately. She
Oh,
has footprints that I don't know if you can see them, but there's footprints in the sand. The
uh-huh.
sand was a huge part of it. Everything that the book stands for is reflected here. And then the back, this is my favorite part. That's Orion's belt, and that's a constellation that Noah and Derek refer to throughout the book. And
Mhm.
that little detail, so
That's wonderful. It must
good.
feel so good to have someone design a cover that represents exactly what you are writing about, what your story is about.
It is, and she's so talented. Even the preliminary artwork I thought was great, and I thought that was the end result, and I was so happy with it already. But it was challenging because Eva lives in the Netherlands, and my
Mhm.
editor lives in Florida, and the interior designer is in Canada. So we're dealing with three different time zones plus
Oh,
mine. I started emailing people at whatever time I saw fit. And I was
uh-huh.
like, answer when you can, answer when you wake up, no rush. But I couldn't fall within the 9 to 5 office hours because I don't know their time zone. So
Right.
I was just like, answer when you can. And thank you.
So we have another question from someone who's watching. Um, did you have to cut any significant scenes from the final version? And second part is, who is the hardest character to write?
Such a good question. I didn't cut any final scenes. In fact, I had to add scenes. When I sent it to my editor, she thought it was a little short and she thought it needed more grief, which was shocking because it was a sad book as it was. And I was like, Andy, do you want to break people's hearts? What is going on? And I listened to her advice and it came out great, but there were no scenes I had to cut off. I had to add more information to make it more meaty. And
Mm-hmm.
then as far as the second question, which was characters, which one was hardest to write, right?
Right.
Derek. Derek
Mm-hmm.
was very hard for me to write because many people assume that Noah and Derek mirrors my relationship with my boyfriend, which is not the case. And I have to make that distinction because things get rough in this book. And I don't want people to think that that was my own experience. But it was really hard for me to write Derek because there's attitudes that he has and feelings that he has that I don't approve of, And I really had to get in his mindset to understand why he thought that was justifiable and why he thought and felt that that was okay. So Grandma Nadia was easy because I lived with her, the grandma, easy. Noah, there's a lot of her that's reflected from me, but Derek was just the hardest one because I couldn't get it. I was like, what you're doing is not okay, but it's necessary. It has to be in the book.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. Um, so, I think you spoke with Zach, our technician, beforehand, and talked about what it felt like that people are always asking, what does it feel like to have a book come out? But you said it's really the day before that it was powerful. I'm wondering if you could talk about what that felt like last
Yes.
week before your book came out.
On Thursday. I first of all, I think I'm in denial because I'm holding this book and it doesn't feel like it's mine. And I see my name right there, but it just doesn't feel it's so surreal. But this I expected. The day before, I was supposed to be the most excited about this huge thing that was happening the next day, but I was so sad.
Oh.
I'm not gonna say I was depressed because that's a big word, but I was very, very sad and I couldn't figure out why. I was supposed to go to wrestling training and I took the day off because I was like, if I go, my head's not in it. I'm gonna hurt somebody on an accident. There's no way. So I called it off and I went to Starbucks and I got a matcha this big. And I sat in my couch and I was like, why am I feeling these things that I'm feeling? And my conclusion was that I have written about my grief for so long, for 5 years, and it was private between the book and myself that I knew the next day it was going to be out for the world to read it. And it felt like I was giving my heart away and giving my grief and my insecurities away for people to read. And that was very scary. It felt like I was giving a child away. And I was
Oh.
like, I don't know what's happening with my body right now. I would love to ignore it like I used to do, but it felt like it was almost a disservice to the story for me to try to ignore it. So I felt it, all of it, too much. And after I was done with that, I watched two comedy specials to get myself out of that funk and really just try to be happy for the thing that was happening, that was exciting. I just couldn't focus on the excitement part. I could just focus on the vulnerability of it all.
Uh-huh. I love that. I love hearing that because so many times authors just talk about how exciting it is or how they move on to the next book or, not people don't often talk about how it feels to get that book out into the world, especially for you as a debut author. Is this your first book? And you put so much into it. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really lovely insight. So.
Yeah.
Um, so for my final question, I have to ask, do you have another book you're working on, or do you plan on writing another one in the future?
No, I don't have another book I'm working on right now. I'm not gonna say never. I don't know
Okay.
if I'm gonna recruit more grief starting now so that I can just go, here you go, into another book. But
Uh-huh.
as of right now, the answer is no. I really want to enjoy the whole process post publishing, which is very new to me. I really
Mm-hmm.
want to understand what I've done and be proud of it. I don't think I've had time to process it yet. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, this is a very, very big deal. So I want to bask in that for a little bit, feel everything I had to feel. I don't know if I'll write another book, but it's not in the works. I can promise you that much. I need to
Okay.
go travel and decompress, and then later I'll make that decision.
Wonderful. Well, that's so great. I think you're doing what's right for you, and we thank you for putting this book out. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors, wherever they take you. I want to thank those of you who joined us today, and for you to purchase a book, you can order it on our website. You can call and order it over the phone. And if you live locally in the Bay Area, please come by our store in San Francisco in the Ferry Building or Corte Madera, our main store, and shop locally. So I want to wish everybody a wonderful week wherever you are. Stay warm, and thank you again so much, Sophia.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you'll have a wonderful night.
You're welcome.